Okay, so this one is about the nature of boundaries. And I want to discuss boundaries in context mainly of the implications on trust, not just of our trust in our circumstances or our environment or other people, but most importantly, trust in ourselves and the implications of on our body losing trust in our will. And so I really want to zero in here. When our will, as a signal within the system, within our biology, can no longer be trusted by our biology and the implications of that. So, boundaries. Now, boundaries, it's an incredibly nuanced and precise art in setting and maintaining a boundary, holding a boundary, knowing when to allow a boundary to dissolve or to, learning the skill of entraining the environment in ways where boundaries naturally dissolve by imbuing trust into the system, by expanding the awareness in the system so that boundaries naturally dissolve. And I think this is where the art comes in. But ultimately understanding the profound consequences of dishonoring ourselves by letting go of our own boundaries or allowing our boundaries to be compromised and justifying that to ourselves in a whole bunch of different ways. Guilt and shame and all the rest of it are major culprits, but I really want to go deep into this to get to the core of it. And so boundaries really mean that we are honoring our own sovereignty and our will and our free will. And so a boundary is something that we have in place where we say to ourselves, I have a standard for myself in terms of honoring my own preferences, my sovereignty, whatever they may be to me, my free will. There's a standard that I have and there's a line that I will not cross. And so I, as someone who intends to maintain self-respect and maintain my own dignity, then as the one who is responsible for protecting and preserving my own dignity and my own sovereignty, then if a boundary is crossed, then I will enforce that boundary. Understanding that doesn't mean imposing my will upon someone else. It just means exercising my right to defend myself and to defend that boundary. And so what I want to zero in on here is that if we sense, let's say we go into an environment and we are dishonored by another human being, and that dishonor has come in context of someone expressing a sense of entitlement to our energy, our time, our resources, our care, whatever it may be. And they're acting entitled. So that sets off a trigger, and that trigger is an impulse within our body that says this could potentially be unsafe. And so our impulse is to defend, right? And that the way that we defend may be attack. Attack is a valid form of defense. Just it's important to understand that. Attack is an extremely efficient and effective way to defend oneself, especially if the threat increases by choosing to be passive. And so attack is a valid form of defense. And so the skill comes in that someone acting from a sense of entitlement, whilst it is dishonoring, it is not in and of itself a threat. The threat only enters if we don't trust ourselves to hold our boundary, right? And so where the subtle nuance of this is that the danger in someone acting entitled to our time, energy, resources, care, whatever it may be, is creating a sense of obligation. And sometimes the emotional weight of that obligation can feel very threatening. And so this is why the naming of the edges, when in terms of personal sovereignty and enforcing boundaries, is absolutely essential and critical. And so, but what we often do is, and this is where the vulnerabilities within our relationship dynamics begin to really surface and show their true colors, because a common mechanism that we use to hold our relationships in place is codependency and people pleasing. And so people pleasing is the unconscious dissolving of a boundary to please someone else. This people pleasing is what we do when we have a boundary, but we pretend that it's not there in order to please someone else so that they don't leave us or don't act out against us or don't hurt us or whatever it may be. And so this is why this having the skill is one thing, but having the maturity to acknowledge the truth that we are surrendering our boundaries in order to please someone else is a very difficult pill to swallow, especially if the stakes are high. Especially if the reality of what it would mean to acknowledge that we are afraid of being on our own, as an example, or if we are afraid of being rejected because if we hold a boundary, right? And sometimes people lord that over us, Someone else who's also codependent, they may use that as leverage. And those things that can easily escalate into emotional blackmail and using leverage in a very transactional way, when in truth, love is really what should be underpinning the whole thing. And so that's what I want to talk about next. Love is an entitlement. And it seems paradoxical because I've just spoken about care and sovereignty being conditional, and that is true. And so I'll give you an example. So myself as a human being, I have responsibilities, I have obligations that I've made legally and willfully, and so therefore I have a list of priorities. And so in that context, I'm a human being and I have a finite amount of bandwidth to invest myself into the duty of care that I have for those obligations that I've made and that I have. And so if someone enters into my circumstances and are acting entitled to my care, yet I have a number of responsibilities and limited bandwidth, then my capacity to deliver care for that person is compromised. And capacity, it is what it is. It's finite. If we force the issue, the only possible outcome is overwhelm, and that's like clipping in audio. It's like it distorts the signal, introduces confusion, and reduces the fidelity of the signal. So my ability to process is compromised, my ability to make high fidelity decisions, and my ability to hold the integrity of the system that I'm the steward of is compromised because there's noise, and it's because I don't have the capacity to process that. So the signal to noise ratio is compromised. Therefore, the system is compromised if I compromise my integrity to create space for this human being who's creating a sense of entitlement or a sense of obligation for me to have to provide care unconditionally. But it's conditional because I'm human. My care is conditional upon my capacity and having headroom and bandwidth. So despite how much someone might want me to provide care and expect it to be unconditional, it is conditional. It always is. And that's not an emotional thing. It's pure physics. Now, what is unconditional is my love, right? So let's say, and so this is, that the nuance here is super, super important. Let's say someone comes into my field of awareness and I become aware that they require care. They haven't asked for care. They haven't insinuated that I should provide care. They're not trying to blackmail me and act entitled to my care. However, I love this person deeply, and what's being naturally evoked within me is love. And so in this, I am being given, because it's in evocation, I've been given feelings inside my body, thoughts, desires that are surplus energy in the system, that if I allow myself to receive these, then I'm not compromising my bandwidth. I have the capacity, but not to do what the other person asks or expects me to do. I only have the additional capacity and bandwidth to follow what is being naturally evoked and given, to follow that wave of energy within me. So I'm gonna use that energy in the way that I want to use it, not to please someone else, right? And this happened in my life recently, where someone I deeply love required care urgently, and could have been potentially life-threatening. And so, I had a lot of emotion evoked, a lot of love, and that manifested itself as deep care. But also, I kind of went on a rampage, and I was prepared to. I was prepared to create environments that felt comfortable and compressed in order to get to the truth, in order to get everything that was required for that person to reach safety, right? And so I was really pressing up against other people's boundaries and making them feel uncomfortable, and willfully, I was allowing my energy to be imposing, and for it to be potentially feel invasive to people. I was intentionally and purposefully challenging. And this is the nature of love. Love can take any shape and form. It's not about making people feel lovey-dovey or romantic, or, it's not about softness. It's not about any one particular thing. It can show up in any which way that will express the depth of love that I was feeling for that human being, and is willing to do anything for them to be safe, to keep them safe. And so I'm prepared to use the full gamut of who I am and what I am capable of expressing to accomplish that mission, right? Someone may see that as toxic masculinity because of the invasiveness. Someone may see it as impolite because of the overt challenge I'm prepared to pose to people who have an influence on the perceived outcome, right? And so I'm indifferent to other people's experience of how I'm showing up in that context. They have to set their own boundaries. They have to maintain their own boundaries. They have to push back on me if I'm crossing an implicit boundary, right? And so this is where I want to focus on next. People are not mind readers. If you meet someone for the first time, you don't know what their boundaries are. Intimacy enables us to see the hidden boundaries and to define them explicitly. But if I meet you for the first time, all of your boundaries are implicit. And so if there's no, life-threatening scenario, and I meet you for the first time, we can just allow curiosity to naturally emerge, and we can flirt with each other's edges using curiosity alone. And it's a very enjoyable experience. We feel very safe exploring each other's curiosity typically. And so that's ideal. However, if I meet someone let's say it's a doctor, and someone's life is at risk, then my energy is going to press, and it is going to challenge. It's going to be far less of an invitation, although I'm aware of how powerful those invitations are. So it's like the natural inclination is to press, and that is valid. However, the ideal scenario and where the best results will emerge is when there's compression and expansion, and that expansion comes from silence, comes from invitation, comes from holding space for there to be headroom. And headroom is so important. The best results you'll ever get in any scenario that is compressed and that is pressing and urgent is and it feels very contradictory to do this, but is to introduce silence and breath and headroom and space for uncertainty to breathe, because uncertainty in truth it's pregnant with possibility. And when you constrain the space entirely and completely, then you're choking it from emergence, playing a factor and playing a role in the outcome that you're hoping for. And so it's a dance, right? It's a dance. And being able to trust in the potential of uncertainty to delight and surprise takes time. It takes experimentation. It takes knowing yourself. It takes knowing your own boundaries, and it takes you having to have cultivated the trust in yourself to hold and enforce your own boundaries no matter what, without compromise. Because self-trust is the gate opener to being able to entrain space in this way. Because if you can't trust yourself not to compromise your own standards and boundaries, then the structure and the system that you and the space that you're entraining, you can't inherently trust it, because it could give at any time. It could collapse at any time. So if you can't trust yourself in that way, then you're not going to be able to trust your own judgment very much, and you'll inadvertently and unconsciously question your own judgment constantly, which causes deferral, chronic deferral, if I'm honest, where you're deferring to something or someone, some form of authority, technology, that you do trust more than yourself. And so part of the solution to any problem statement becomes giving your power away, right? So it's a horrendous problem people pleasing, and you got to be able to break the cycle at any cost, to be able to act with integrity in a way where you trust yourself, and of course where others trust you. And so another seemingly paradoxical aspect of boundary setting and enforcing is, if we are people pleasing, where we're surrendering our boundaries in order to please someone else, so that in order to prevent something unwanted from happening, then it seems paradoxical to enforce a boundary at any cost, especially if it could cause loss. So if someone's care is conditional upon us compromising a specific boundary we have, when we enforce that boundary, we're enforcing the incompatibility of the system, and therefore we have to be prepared for whatever loss occurs due to the enforcement of the integrity of that system. And so, there's it's a subtle art. And so I want to now talk about the biological impact of this. So every human being, our sole responsibility and duty is self-care. Now, your job is to care for your own health and well-being, and your biology has no choice. Like every cell in your body has no choice but to trust your judgment. It has no other choice. And so everything that you believe is determining the signals and the impulses that get sent around your body. So everything that you believe about your environment is determining the way in which your body is sending impulses. Those impulses then determine the chemical reactions that take place, and so on and so forth. So what you believe, of course, it's incredibly important, but more importantly is that your will, the expression of your will, your choices, are an impulse in the system. And so if your biology can't trust your judgment, then the system is seriously compromised. It's seriously compromised. But in the same way that if your biology can trust your judgment, so as an example, let's say you move into a space, into an environment, and the signals from that environment are telling your biology that it is unsafe to be in that environment. You acknowledge you're feeling those impulses, the fear, the triggering, and then you make a decision to bring yourself into safety in whichever way, shape, or form is most appropriate. Fight, flight, escape. Defend in whichever way, shape, or form that is most conducive to bringing that environment into a state of coherence. Then if you relentlessly honor yourself first, and then seek to bring the environment into coherence so that everybody feels safe and not threatened, but beginning with yourself, you eventually entrain your body to then trust your ability to keep it safe, right? But the problem is, if you enter into an environment and all the signals are creating impulses that it is unsafe to remain in that space, in its current context, but you allow yourself to remain exposed to those impulses and signals without acting, and People talk about a freeze response as well, but I'm talking about continuing to subject yourself to that no matter what, and refusing to enforce a boundary that you know you have. Then you're compromising your own integrity, and your biology cannot trust you to keep it safe when those signals are firing. And so what choice does your biology have other than to try and circumvent your choices, to distrust your will, right? Now, what happens with it in a government of a nation when the people begin to mistrust the executive body, the government? Revolt, upheaval. The people revolt, and the cells in your body, they revolt. If they don't trust the one empowered to execute with executive power, then they'll vote someone else in. Or if that system becomes corrupt, an oppressive civil war, an uprising, whatever it takes. But if you are not enforcing your boundaries, which are a representation of all of the signals and impulses you receive from your body and your interpretation of what they mean, what it means to feel safe, what it means to be safe, and you refuse to enforce those, then your biology cannot trust your judgment. It cannot trust you to act out of the best interest of the unified system. And this creates a huge amount of noise. If the body can't discern noise from signal, then it creates a lot of confusion. And so your body is a system, and you're the CEO. It's a massive organic organization of extremely diverse and complex cells, organisms, interdependencies, systems within systems. And all you have for context is your somatic intelligence, which is the interpretation of the signals you're receiving from your environment, experienced as emotion, thoughts, pressure, tension, and your judgment, your interpretation of what they mean. You're the CEO of the organization. You have total power. You're a dictator, in essence, to a large degree. However, that power can be revoked by your body if it can no longer trust the execution of that power. And so, the autonomic nervous system, the unconscious activities of the body, they begin to act in ways that seem like they're at odds with what our conscious will and desire is. And we often experience this as a sense of entitlement, like, I've had a really hard day, so I'm gonna have takeaways or eat crap food. The sense of entitlement because of how hard our day was, or because of how hard our life has been, or because of how much pain we're in. We're entitled to some kind of reward. That's what a child does, right? A child devoid of responsibility, they feel entitled, and then they act out of that entitlement. They act from that impulse. The only missing piece of the puzzle here is responsibility, because an adult, a mature adult, still feels entitled and still feels that sense of entitlement. However, they don't act from it because they know that if they were to act on that impulse from that sense of entitlement, it could compromise the integrity of other obligations, responsibilities that they have to care for the body. It might bring the body out of coherence as a system. And so as the CEO of your body, you're not going to act out of entitlement like a child. Oh, I had a really hard day, so I'm going to eat crap food today. I'm going to dishonor myself because I'm entitled, right? No. You don't act from your entitlement. You acknowledge it exists, and then you act from your duty of care to the system that you are the CEO of. So the only question you need to ask yourself is, how do I honor myself here first? In the same way, if you're the CEO of an organization, you hear the people, you hear what they're saying, you listen, you ensure that they feel heard, but you act out of your sense of responsibility and your sense of obligation. You act from the sense of duty for the care, for the system, not any one aspect of it in isolation. Your obligation is to the coherence and the thriving of the system as a unified whole. Entitlement is for children. If people within your organization are acting entitled, then it's because there's an imbalance of responsibility. And so you meet that behavior with the gravity of responsibility and help them to feel that sense of obligation that they are omitting to take under their own stewardship, right? So this is a sign of that decentralization is a viable mechanism. So to distribute some of that responsibility and to guide them through it, to support them through the taking on of that responsibility so that they mature as human beings within that system, within that organization, or it could be a family or whatever it may be. It doesn't matter if it's kids or adults who are still learning to become adults. You know, this is why the CEOs will always have to exist, is because there are human beings that understand what an obligation is, that understand what responsibility means, that know what it means to enforce a boundary, that understand the cost of grace, who understand that being unpopular is part and parcel if there are entitled human beings acting within the system, right? This is what leadership is, and this is, in truth, this is what the well-being of our body is demanding of us. And so, to bring this to completion in context of boundaries, as a CEO of a company, you are responsible for every single boundary in the organization. If you allow the culture to breach these boundaries, despite the fact that they are all explicit, or if you choose to try and run an organization based on implicit boundaries, where it's just the feelings inside our body implicitly that determine our boundaries, then the culture will be riddled with passive aggression. Passive aggression is the only possible way for someone to politely enforce a boundary within an environment where where the boundaries are not yet explicit. And a whole bunch of contracts locked in a filing cabinet, it is not explicit boundary making. Explicit boundaries are when the edges of agreements have been shaped together, so that it's not just a company saying, here's a template, sign and we'll pay you to do all this stuff. It's that the company is going to adapt and shape itself to perfectly fit the human being based on where their boundaries and preferences are, right? And if your assumptions about the ideal fit change over time, then you flag attention like a grown adult human being. You say, here's a conflict of interest, or I'm feeling tension. Can we hold space to surface this and to redefine the edges so that it fits? Yeah, of course. Yeah, that sounds great. Brilliant. This is all it takes for an organization to become adaptive and to evolve. You do it with your customers. Internally, you treat each other like your customers internally based on the system that you're a part of. But you have to understand what the system is. You have to understand what that system requires in order to perform optimally. And so in order to nourish it. And so defining edges, holding boundaries, they're absolutely essential. And they have to be explicit. As much as it feels good to talk about being in unity, we are one with no boundaries. Yes, we are, but we have preferences, desires, hopes, dreams, missions, things we want to accomplish, things we want to create. And those things have edges. Those things require containment. And so yes, we are one. Yes, at some level, we share the same soul with the same spirit. Whatever it may be, however you interpret that, it's fine. But we live in 3 dimensions where there are edges, where there is separation. So we are that one thing expressing itself in 3 dimensions. So that infinite thing that we are has to be contained and constrained willfully, purposefully, intentionally. We have to have boundaries. And they have to be explicit. And they have to be explicit in our romantic relationships, in our friendships, in our business relationships, in our transactional relationships, in our communities. And the deeper that intimacy is, the more clearly defined those edges are, the more we can hold and train spaces within which every single participant is honored without having to exclude ourselves. And so for all the people pleasers out there, the self-sacrificers, it's okay. I understand. I know that you don't feel safe, which is why you feel as though you have to bargain with people in order to maintain structure and integrity. But the solution, as always, is a plan B. Never put all your eggs in one basket, ever. So that you never, ever remain dependent upon any one thing. That is how you care for yourself. By creating options and focusing only on increasing your confidence in the viability of each option and opportunity. So as you lose confidence in one, you grow confidence in another and let the old one go. If you can bring confidence into focus as your sole focus as a human being and how you manage the opportunities in your life, and you let go of things that are dropping in confidence, or human beings who are reducing your confidence, then you're creating an echo chamber within which all of your time and energy that you're investing into your opportunities is to grow, is to increase your self-confidence. And over time, what you realize is that your confidence is just growing all the time, because you're curating an environment within which confidence is growing in every aspect of your life. And you ruthlessly set a boundary for everything that is decreasing your confidence. This is how you bring laser focus to the things that really matter in your life, which is ultimately unimpeachable self-confidence. Once you have that, you're an immovable force, because you're constantly adapting. You're not attached to any one thing. And you can just move through life with grace. And not indifference, right? It's not like these things don't matter to us. It's just that we've created an environment within which it's safe for all the opportunities we're working on to fail. Because we're not dependent on any one thing. And so be prepared to lose those friendships and those relationships that are diminishing your confidence. But curate opportunities for those relationships, for other relationships to grow and flourish, that are boosting your confidence before you force yourself to let go. So allow yourself that grace. But front up to yourself. Front up to yourself and begin curating opportunities. If all your eggs are in one basket right now, begin with diversifying, increasing your pipeline of opportunities for self-care and to care for yourself. And then start shaping your portfolio and your pipeline of opportunities based on what you have the highest confidence in right now. And then invest in activities that are increasing your confidence levels from, say, 40% to 50%, 50% to 60%. And anything that's going from 40% down to 30, down to 20, stop flogging a dead horse, release it, and then reinvest your attention into growing your confidence in something else. And once your confidence in one thing reaches 100%, it exists in reality. And you have structure. And you form a baseline that you know you can depend on. And if you ever sense that baseline being threatened, focus on a new opportunity, grow it in confidence, so that when the old thing, when you begin to lose confidence in your current baseline, you've got a new baseline emerging. And that's how you live a life of growing in self-confidence. It's fully adaptive, and it's totally joyous because you're so open. You're open to life, and you're investing wisely, but you're also not clinging on to what you have now, because there's always another plate that you can spin. But don't leave it to chance. Create with intent, with focus, and with purpose. And begin by identifying the system that you're in right now, the system of your life that you're in right now, and owning where you're allowing the integrity of that system to be compromised, either through people pleasing, through refusing to enforce a boundary or define a boundary, or believing that an implicit boundary, an unspoken felt boundary, is enough. It's not. If you notice yourself in life being passive aggressive, or if you're in an environment within which people are being passive aggressive, start defining the edges, and start insisting on a culture where the implicit is made explicit. That is the true dance of the masculine and feminine. The implicit boundary is felt, and the explicit boundary is defined. The felt boundary is our feminine sense. The explicit boundary is that felt sense expressed in separation, in masculine energy. And that's unconditional love made conditional. And ultimately, that's what the essence of masculine love is conditional love. It's unconditional love expressed in 3 dimensions. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. That's it for now for the nature of boundaries. Cheers for now.